Wow, Suda51, the wrestling punk lord Undertaker of No More Heroes, and Shinji Mikami, the god of Resident Evil, are teaming up again and making a horror game? Shut up! Akira Yamaoka, the mad lad who gave Silent Hill its sound, is also boarding this crazy bus? And it's gonna be on next-gen consoles? Oh, sweet daddy Jesus, somebody pinch me! They're gonna knock this out of the park. A slam dunk, other sports analogies. Oh, hi EA. Welcome to another spooky, kooky, big boneriuki, I tried there, episode of What Happened, the show that's 35% about games published by Electronic Arts. I wish I was kidding. Anyway, as our not-so-subtle intro paragraph set up, we're going to be delving deep into the darkness and slice through the many layers of Grasshopper Manufacturer's road trip through hell. Shadows of the Damned was once an intriguing title that, over the course of its long development, got progressively less and less intriguing. I wonder why. Now, while it was released in 2011, its origins actually date all the way back to 2006, just after the launch of Killer 7, which put Goichi Suda's indie video game band on the map. However, it was the healthy Japanese and European sales of his previous game, Michigan Road to Hell, which, well, there's literally nothing I can say that can do Michigan justice, so just, here.
That thing wasn't so tough.
Don't let your guard down just yet. In the movie...
Suda then began drafting up ideas for his next foray into the twisted and horrific, and it's here where the concept for Kurayami, Japanese for darkness, was born. There are no surviving videos or in-game screenshots of Kurayami, but in the years of 2006 to 2007, Suda would let slip small details whenever he could. First off, the original plan was for it to be a PS3 exclusive, which would be the first time Grasshopper would develop for an HD-ready console. He also painted a vague but interesting picture of Kurayami's early visual style. We're capable of taking on technically and financially heavy development, at least one game at a time. Sony has a vision that as a creator I want to respond to, and to deliver this very detailed drawing shader, we need the PS3's power. Our main focus at the moment is to make these illustrations run in real time. Those illustrations are the ones you see here, which definitely have a distinct look, very stylized with a high contrast, and we can clearly see that darkness was indeed a main motif. Now, when you look at the product that was released into stores, darkness is still a tenet of the gameplay that the player needs to dispel to progress forward. They do this by shooting, a lot, but this was not always the case. In fact, firearms weren't something Suda had considered in these early days, but instead thought that a single torch would light the way forward, illuminating pitch-black areas. In conjunction with that, Kurayami wasn't going to necessarily focus on traditional combat, something Suda also elaborated on. It's not about some hideous monsters or evil creatures coming out of the darkness, but playing on our natural fears of the dark, and the uneasiness that comes from the absence of noise and life. It shows how people change when faced with their fears. So we can see that Kurayami was going to be more akin to a psychological horror game, revolving around the fear of what you can't see, and harnessing the power of next gen to make it happen. Suda also wanted towns you could explore and NPCs you could converse with said conversations even leading to some heated moments. Mission progression was also to be somewhat unfocused, almost sandbox-like, as the hero would explore a massive castle town. Suda thought a more open nature would best represent the work of Franz Kafka, whose writings, specifically The Castle, were a major influence. It's important to note that this was all during the early prototyping phase, and after the completion of No More Heroes for the Wii in late 2007, Suda had his sights set on getting Kurayami into full production. But to develop on more expensive HD consoles, he knew he would need to find a publisher willing to invest. While it's unknown if other companies were in consideration, he presented the concept of Kurayami to Electronic Arts, and even got one of his friends funds to help out. This was probably something the higher-ups at EA were well into, RE4 dollar signs swimming in their eyes. Okay, so double-edged sword here. EA was interested in Kuriyami, and their interest got the game off the ground.
That's good.
But they wanted to change everything about it.
That's bad.
So, predictably, the most interesting bits of Kuriyami gradually started being stripped away. Firstly, a gun was instituted right off the bat as the starting weapon at EA's insistence.
The gun is good. The gun is good!
This was chronicled in the Art of Grasshopper book, specifically nestled in the less than glowing section about Shadows of the Damned. Suda recalls being told, Westerners are about guns, give him a gun, which, I mean, they're not wrong, but this one change right here is where everything pivoted to a different direction. Because originally, in Kuriyami, the player would slowly accrue new weapons and gear, starting off the game fairly weak and even shirtless, kinda like a Souls game. You can still see the shreds of this in Shadows of the Damned, because when not in combat, your gun reverts to a torch form. Now, the main hero, who didn't have an official name for several years, also needed to start ticking more EA boxes, and thus became Garcia Hotspur, a wisecracking demon-killing badass.
I do love a party. Maybe we could play pong. Or do shots!
Now, he can't just wisecrack to himself, he would need someone to bounce off of, so this is where Paula comes into play. She was going to be a young fairy-like girl who lived inside Garcia's gun, hopping like a bunny and fluttering about when her special ability was needed. Suda thought this was cute. Now, it might shock you, but this was another absolute no-no on EA's giant list of big no-nos. Again, in the Art of Grasshopper, EA asked me, why is there a bunny hopping around and what are you trying to make? I don't get it. The producers at EA then advised Suda, saying all stories can be broken down in 4 different types, and told him to pick one. Suda chose a love story, as it was something he hadn't tackled yet at that time. Thus Paula, the tiny hopping fairy girl, became Paula, the buxom, scantily clad damsel in distress that doesn't really do anything except needing to be saved from distress. EA is a really macho company, and we argued with them as we developed it. Their demands were strong. We ended up drafting the scenario 5 different times before it was completed. In the end, each was so unique that I had basically written 5 different games. So, let's summarize. Instead of exploring the depths of a pervasive, all-encompassing darkness and perhaps even the human psyche itself, let's just do an edgy Mario. The changes obviously didn't stop there. Shooting and action were emphasized to the point that, well, that's pretty much all you do, with the survival horror elements being again pushed so far into the background, it would be inaccurate for it to be categorized as such. The tone itself, the writing, voice acting, world building, and character design also took on a more darkly humorous bend, which, while not bad or unentertaining, was still far away from Grasshopper's original intent.
Just warn me if I have to fuck a horse to unlock a door, huh?
The story, as alluded to before, all boiled down to Garcia, the good guy, needing to traverse the many layers of hell to save Paula from Fleming, the bad guy, because the bad guy doesn't like the good guy, and that's it. Man, some producer at EA sure had a hard-on for hell-based rescue missions around this time. EA eventually was satisfied enough to give the official green light, which marks the longest known prototyping and pitching phase Grasshopper ever went through. Thankfully, with the go-ahead, the rest of the team formed up quickly. Akira Yamaoka signed on to give the project a distinctive soundscape. Also, with EA's backing, Grasshopper were able to use Unreal 3, expensive at the time, as the engine Shadows would run on. From that point on, there were no real issues using this Western-developed engine, because wanting to avoid potential problems, Grasshopper then hired outside employees who had Unreal experience to make the transition a smooth one. Much of 2008 and 2009 went by with Suda being oddly hesitant about revealing anything in regards to Shadows of the Damned. Several expos and interviews throughout the year saw him nervously looking to translators and producers whenever it was brought up. It's an action horror game, and it'll be very scary. And I guess I can also tell you that the main character has a very cool watch. I better leave it at that. This was a weird time, as for many months, if not a year, it was unclear what Shadows of the Damned was even going to be, leading some to kinda disregard it. Now is about the time where things get messy and a bit confusing. If you're passingly familiar with Shadows of the Damned, rented it once, watched a video, you'll be excused if you assumed it was directed by Suda or maybe even Mikami, cause it was. Yeah, a Suda and Mikami joint, right? Well, not quite. Undeniably, they had a huge influence, but once things started running under EA full-time, the director's chair needed to be filled by someone who might be a bit more accustomed to monolithic Western publishers. So as much as the marketing made you think that one of the legendary Japanese creators was at the helm, Shadows of the Damned was actually directed by Massimo Guarini, who certainly has had an interesting career path. Breaking into the industry at Ubisoft, Massimo started on Disney and Tom Clancy titles, before moving into a director's position on Naruto Rise of Ninja. Yeah, remember this shit? This actually happened. He then moved to Japan and worked for Interchannel, who developed new IPs for video games and animation, and brokered deals with various other publishers. Not surprising, but within a short time, he bumped into Suda at a Japanese bar, and the two hit it off famously. Here is a dramatic reenactment. Seeing an opportunity to work directly with industry giants, Massimo took up a position at Grasshopper full-time to handle directing duties on Shadows, which by pretty much every estimation was probably a smart move. Having worked at Ubisoft, he was the ideal choice in which to deal with EA's demands and changes, and it's here where the game made the most progress. Unfortunately, it also regressed in some other key areas. The game was originally slated for the PS3, obviously, the 360, the PC, and the Wii. Two of those are not like the others, in that they don't exist. Japanese developed titles around this time had a 50-50 chance of making it onto the PC, and this one landed squarely in the 50, the bad 50. And since Unreal 3 didn't even support the Wii, that version found itself on the chopping block fairly early on. Shame on both counts, as a mouse or Wii pointer controls would have made for some fun third-person aiming. Now, why is it that some people might not even be aware of all this, that the Suda and Mikami game was directed by neither of them? Well, fortunately, in an interview, Massimo directly addressed that. Honestly, I've pretty much had creative control since the very beginning, since when I joined the project. Obviously, that was probably not exposed to the media beforehand, so that's why you just happen to hear my name only now. I started on the project after EA signed it. The gestational period that this game had was so long, I joined a year and a half ago, that there were some problems from a production point of view, and we had to basically redo the whole game from scratch. So I would say ultimately the actual production time of the game was about, not considering assets, but in terms of pure game design, was about a year and a half, something like that. This all stems, the cause of all of this is because Suda was told by EA execs that his original ideas simply wouldn't fly outside Japan, and it needed to shift for them to feel confident in its success. Suda recalled this particular piece of advice he received from EA as the following: "There's this thing called an elevator pitch in America, and if you can't tell your story in the length of an elevator ride, Hollywood won't use it." And EA was attempting to be very Hollywood around this time. Dead Space, Mirror's Edge, Dante's Inferno, Army of Two, Mass Effect. The problem here is that the game languished for so long during that early pitching phase, it needed to make up time elsewhere, so it was greatly reduced in scope and ambition, boiling it down to the bare minimum, a wacky third-person shooter in hell. Yeah, that can be explained in an elevator ride. Unfortunately though, when a game starts throwing around names like Akira Yamaoka or Shinji Mikami, fans or critics will inevitably try to compare it to their previous works, which is just a bit unfair. Grasshopper games always, and still have, a punk mentality to them. They may be rough around the edges, but they more than make up for that in certain areas. If Kuriyami had been brought to market, its unique themes and off-kilter ideas would have made it stand out and be harder to compare to those things. Sorta like, positioning the game as a horror shooter from the makers of RE4 and Silent Hill put some lofty expectations on its purple, leather-clad shoulders, which wound up garnering it some average reviews. The only thing more average was the marketing budget EA allocated to it. These factors, all put together, resulted in Shadows of the Damned selling 24,000 copies in its North American launch month, on PS3 and 360 combined. Japan didn't really shore up those numbers either, contributing a paltry 9,000 more. The confusion over what the game really was, the minimal marketing coupled with releasing on the exact same day as another horror-based shooter for 3 years, didn't really help. Now, don't get me wrong, Shadows of the Damned is a schlocky, entertaining, over-the-top experience, but it doesn't quite have the spark of Grasshopper's other works, nor does it have the well-developed gameplay loop indicative of Mikami, so it doesn't really excel in any one area. Even Mikami himself felt that the end product is not exactly what they wanted. Shadows of the Damned became a completely different game. That was a bit disappointing. I think Suda was unable to create the scenario he originally had in his head, and he rewrote the scenario several times. I think his heart was broken. He's such a unique creator, so it seems to me that he was not quite comfortable with making this game. Fortunately, some aspects of Kuriyami resurfaced years later in 2015 with Suda's one-shot manga Kuriyami Drive, and Shadows of the Damned even returned in an unexpected but welcome form via Travis Strikes Again. Seems that somewhere along the line, EA sold the rights back to Grasshopper, probably deeming it worthless, so at least Suda still has a little love for Garcia and Johnson, despite the trials he had to go through developing their road trip through hell. It is again refreshing talking about a project that, while considered a bit of a misfire, didn't result in anyone losing their job. Suda, Mikami, Yamaoka, and Massimo are all still working hard within the industry. It's a lesson in that sometimes having to compromise the vision and wild ideas of an auteur isn't always the best course of action.
I'm what you might call concerned.
Me too.
If you know of any other positively ghoulish stories about games, movies, or consoles, scream them at me on Twitter, or creep your way over to the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss to nominate a future episode. See you next time, and thanks for watching.